I don't know if any of you ever used to read, there's an old comedy magazine called Mad Magazine. They had a thing in there called Spy versus Spy. That's what came to mind as I was preparing this week for the sermon. This week Spy versus Spy, first of all, for those who don't know, it was a little comic strip in Mad Magazine. And then when they made Mad TV, they did like an animated version, but it was like a spy all in black and a spy all in white, and they were always trying to kill each other. One that I remember that was kind of funny is it seems like they're finally getting along, and they're sitting down, and they're each pouring coffee for the other one and stuff, and then you see them get up and pour their coffee out because neither one trusts the other one and leave, and the cats come and lick up the liquid, and they both die, so they both tried to poison each other. Anyways, that's what that's about. But it came to mind because this week we have Jacob, who himself is a very tricky man, and he is going up against Laban again. Laban, his father-in-law, and Laban himself is also a trickster. So I called this Trickster versus Trickster. Really, Deceiver versus Deceiver is probably a more accurate title. Both of them have a history of deceiving each other, and this passage this morning, they're going to go up against each other. If you want to go to Genesis chapter 31, we're going to start there. I apologize. Genesis 30 is where we're going to be starting. We're going to go into 31. Got a long passage, so I'm going to try and go at a steady pace here. But we're going to we're going to go a piece at a time as we go along again. So we're going to start in Genesis 30. We're just going to read 25 to 27 first. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." So let's stop there for a second. A little context about what's going on here. So we have Jacob, and he had to flee from his family and from his homeland. And he had to flee because he had stolen his twin brother Esau's birthright and his blessing, and Esau was flat out planning to kill him for it. And so Jacob fled, and he went to this area to Laban and encountered Laban because his father had said to go to this area so as not to intermarry with people who had some false worshiping that they were doing. And so he ends up here, he meets Rachel, and he wants to him, and instead gets Jacob to marry the older sister, Leah. And then Jacob works another 7 years so that he can he marries Rachel and then works another 7 years as the dowry for her. So at this point in the story, Jacob has been here a very long time. I can't imagine he's super fond of his father-in-law who tricked him in such a terrible way. And he finally says, "Time to go back to my homeland." He's been there for years. He wants to go home. Who knows what's going through his head about his brother Esau, who he has not seen in so long. Maybe he's hoping that Esau has calmed down enough at least not to murder him. And so he wants to go home, and he has what I think is a pretty reasonable request. Let me leave. Let me take my wives and my children. We saw last week he's got the beginning of all 12 tribes of Israel basically going on already. And so he wants to leave. And that's where we're at here. But Laban says he wants him to stay. And it says that he has learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. So because Jacob has been there, God is blessing Jacob the same way he did Abraham, the same way he did Isaac. So just by virtue of Jacob being there, Laban is blessed just by being in proximity of him. That's how greatly Jacob's being blessed, right? Because Jacob is working for Laban, and so everything that is there is getting blessed by God through that. Now, just a quick note there in verse 27, it says, I've learned by divination. There's a translation, I think it's the King James Version or New King James Version, probably both, that says, I've learned by experience. The Hebrew word there is a little complicated. It talks about kind of like the experience of divination, and so that's why some people could take it the other direction. I think probably the better translation, though, is divination. And you might remember in the summer we talked a bit about divination. When I did the sermon on King Saul going to visit the witch of Endor, or the medium of Endor. And I wanted to mention a little bit more about that because I didn't hit on a few things in that sermon that I would have liked to. When we think about that, first of all, what is divination? It is trying to supernaturally learn something about the world or supernaturally learn something about the future. And so this passage is very key, I think, to that. It's a well-worded response to anyone who wants to do that. It's Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19. And it says, when someone tells you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? It's Isaiah 8:19. In our culture, it is thought of as harmless to play with things like Ouija boards, or to have a tarot card reading, or a palm reading, or to read horoscopes and all those things. They're thought of as harmless. The Bible indicates very different. Because what are we doing if somebody goes and tries to use divination or tarot reading or those sorts of things? We are trying to skirt around God and use a different supernatural power to gain knowledge that God has not given us yet. God sometimes just wants us to wait. In fact, Lamentations 3:26 says, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It's not just something that we should do, or it's not just an okay thing. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. This is during Lamentations, by the way. This is written during a time of great trouble for the nation of Israel, and that's part of the message. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Sometimes, first of all, we should turn to God if there's something we think we really need to know, or we really need His guidance. God, if we need a supernatural power, God is the one and only source we should be going to. Turning to anything else is an offense to God. It is breaking His commands. But also, sometimes God doesn't tell us for a reason. God could be building up our patience. Now, most of us, we might want more patience, but we don't like the process of how we build up patience, right? Myself included. So He could be wanting to build up our patience. Also, He could be building up our faith. And I think it's a test of our faith as well. When there's something we desperately want to know, or when we think there's trouble coming up and we stress and we have anxiety over it and we're like, I really need to know this. Do we get angry at God? Do we turn to other sources? Or do we, in faith, have patience and trust God is going to bring us where He wants us to go? God is going to get us through the troubles we might think are coming. And God is going to give us the knowledge that we actually need to know, not just the knowledge that we think we need or that we want. Anyway, that's a little side sermon I guess I'm doing on divination there. Let's keep going. Verses 28 to 36. He added, this is Laban, name your wages and I will pay them. Basically, please stay, I will give you what you want, is what he is saying here. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied. But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled and spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. This is what I mean, deceiver versus deceiver. Now, Jacob has had, by the way, just a reminder, an encounter with God before he even got to Laban. He had that vision in a dream of the staircase or the ladder to heaven, between heaven and earth. So I think Jacob is improving somewhat in his behavior here from what we'd seen in his past. But now he's encountering someone who's willing to be kind of as ruthless as he was, as Jacob had been to his own family. And Jacob is extremely generous here, right? Now, these are the only animals he says he wants as his wages are the ones that are considered blemished. That's all he's asking for. That is a very generous thing for him to say. And even with the blemished ones, if one happens to be born that's not blemished, that's going to be considered stolen, or anything joins his flock that's not one of those blemished types of animals, that's going to all go back to Laban automatically, what he said. This is an incredibly generous thing that Jacob is saying he'll do. It's kind of like the generosity that he said he would work 7 years for Rachel to marry her for the dowry. And in the same way as he did last time, even with as generous an offer as Jacob gave him, Laban's still going to try and take more advantage of him. And he removes all the animals that were supposed to go to Jacob right after they just made the deal. And he puts 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And if Jacob were a man more prone to violence, I would say that is a wise thing for Laban to run that fast, that far, because Jacob's been watching these flocks. It's not mentioned here, but I have to assume he realizes very quickly what Laban had done. Jacob's been watching these flocks already this whole time. Suddenly, none of them have blemishes. Oh, I wonder what happened. But he goes on and he keeps his word. He keeps working here for Laban. By the way, in verse 28 there, when Laban says, "Name your wages," it's like the first time when they agreed for that 7 years for taking Rachel's hand in marriage. Both times Laban talks as if he's going to be generous, but when it comes right down to it, he doesn't want to actually let any of this stuff get away. He just wants to keep taking more and more advantage. Let's go to verse 37, and we'll go to the end of the chapter. Jacob, however, took fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they made it in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so they would mate near the branches, but if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. So, bit of a strange situation going on here. And there's different theories about what's going on with these branches. I've heard people say that there's some sort of scientific explanation as to how you doing this with these branches would have had some sort of effect on the animals. I am particularly skeptical of that claim. I don't know how that would work. I don't think that that's exactly what's going on there. Now, there is some selective breeding going on there, so that, of course, would affect the type of flock that Jacob has and why it would end up going well. But also, as we're going to see as we go on, Jacob later on himself is going to recognize all the blessing that Jacob is getting here it's God blessing him. Honestly, I think the whole branches thing was probably Jacob wasting his time. This is God blessing him. And Laban thinks that he's going to keep Jacob poor and keep Jacob working for him forever, I think, is probably what he's planning. But that's not how it ends up working out. The NIV Study Bible, by the way, gives this interesting note. It says, the Hebrew terms for the words here, poplar and white, are puns on the name Laban. As Jacob had gotten the best of Esau, his other name Edom means red, by serving him a red stew, so now he tries to get the best of Laban, whose name means white, by means of white branches. In effect, Jacob was using Laban's own tactic of deception against him. So that's an interesting little side note of what's going on here. If you want to turn the page over, depending on where you're at in your Bible or your app, to chapter 31. And we're going to read the first 21 verses of chapter 31 before we pause here. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. In the breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all of his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. There's a lot going on in that section. So Jacob had heard Laban's sons saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. That's a kind of a biased view, I think, from Laban's sons here. Laban keeps on changing the wages according to Jacob. Laban keeps trying to take advantage of Jacob, keeps trying to deceive Jacob. God keeps blessing him anyway, but from the perspective of Laban's sons, Jacob is just taking all their family wealth. Laban's flocks are getting smaller, Jacob's keep getting bigger. And Jacob noticed Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. So that's reason number 2 to leave. Laban is getting more and more hostile. Laban's sons are getting more and more hostile. And then he goes and talks to Laban's own daughters. They're also like, okay, he's treating us like he doesn't care about us anyways. He's treating us like foreigners. What you've accumulated for him, all the wealth you gained for him, he's already wasted it all anyways. What reason do we have to stay with our father? They're ready to go leave with him too. All signs are pointing on time to go. And then, of course, the most important one, God commanded him in this vision, in this dream, now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. And really, every sign is pointing to time to leave, but that's the only one that really matters the most, right? God told him, go. Time to go. And so that's what he did. And by the way, let's take note there, where all this conflict is coming from, is there is at least with the sons and stuff, there's a jealousy issue again going on here, right? We talked about jealousy last week between Rachel and Leah. This time, in this passage, they're at least on board together. This is one thing they agree on. They both want to go with Jacob. They don't want to stay with Laban. How bad is Laban that he got these two who seem to be fighting about everything to finally get along? But there is jealousy from Laban and his sons. It's hard to be happy when others are doing better than we are sometimes. There's that saying, comparison is the thief of joy. We need to focus on the blessings God has given us. The NIV Study Bible also gives this insightful note. To compare our success with that of others is a dangerous way to judge the quality of our lives. By comparing ourselves to others, we may be giving jealousy a foothold. We can avoid jealousy by rejoicing in others' successes. That's how we want to get past jealousy. We don't want to compare and look at somebody else and say, oh, they got to do that. I wish I could have done that. They have that. I wish I had that. Instead, try and take joy in what God has given them, celebrate what God has done for them, and celebrate what God is doing for you. Let me also mention what it says in verse 19. Rachel stole Laban's household gods. How do you steal a god? What a sad excuse for a god that is that can be stolen. Or a sad excuse for a god that is that can be kept in a house. His household gods. And of course, it's talking about these statues, these idols that they would have had there. And one of the things to know about that is those statues also were a symbol of authority, oftentimes in that culture. So by stealing Laban's household gods, his idols, Rachel was kind of taking his the symbol of his authority out of his house, away from him as well, which probably part of why it was so important to him when he tries to, track it down, as we're going to see, or track them down. One of the things to think about when it comes to idols is, I think we have a tendency to think nowadays that idols aren't something we need to worry about in our lives. We don't have statues anywhere. We aren't going down and worshiping something made of wood or stone. But the Bible is very clearly, it's not just physical idols that we can have distract us from worshiping God. If there is something in our lives that we are putting before God, then for us, it is an idol. Not a statue, it's an idol. What do we have in our life that we are putting before God? What is it that we are saying in our hearts? God, you can have everything else in my life, but this thing, don't touch that thing. That's an idol. Here's one that got me thinking. This was actually something that somebody said when I was in training for church planting, for starting churches. And one of the things the guy teaching the class said as he was talking about this subject, he said, what is there in your life that if God took it away, you would turn on God, that you would be angry at him? What would make you not want to worship him? Because there can be very, very good things in our lives. There can be things in our lives that are a huge direct blessing from God, but if we have that elevated in our heart above where God is, that's an idol, right? So let's continue going on here, verses 22 to 30. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled, taking his relatives with him. He pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban with his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you. But last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" There's a number of things we could unpack there too. I'm trying to go quick because it's a long passage and I'm aware of the time here. But so Jacob had a 3-day head start, but he's also got all these flocks and everything that he's bringing with them. He's going a lot slower. Laban and his whole crew manages to catch up. But while Laban's on the way, God gives him a warning, again in a dream. In this story of Jacob's life, there's a lot of God speaking to people through dreams in this time period. And he warns him not to say anything good or bad. So just to give you an idea of kind of what that means, I think God is kind of using Laban's own words towards him here. So back in Genesis 24, verse 50, that's the passage where Abraham had sent his servant to go find a wife for Isaac. And Laban had been the one that spoke with this servant. And when Abraham's servant had come to ask for Rebekah as a wife for Isaac, Laban had seen the servant from this very powerful and wealthy family. Laban, judging by his behavior in these sections here with Jacob, Laban probably had his eye on this wealthy person's going to give us a lot of money for Rebekah's hand in marriage. And Laban had said, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other." So when it profits Laban, he's willing to say, "I'll say nothing about it one way or the other. It's from the Lord." And so God is essentially saying the same thing to you now. Now it's going to cost you, but don't say anything one way or the other. And so that's what ends up happening here. And Laban paints himself as a very, very innocent, good guy here, right? If you had just told me, we would have had this big celebration as you guys go away. I don't know about you guys, but judging from how he's acted in the entire rest of the story description of him, I'm a little skeptical. And in fact, I think we see really what his intention was, because if God had not spoken to him, what would Laban have done? Verse 29, "I have the power to harm you." I wonder if in Laban's mind, as he went off to go track Jacob down, if he wasn't thinking, okay, Jacob's been enough use to me. For this offense, I'm going to kill him, and my daughters and all of his flocks are going to come back with me anyway. I wonder if that's what was on his mind. And I think the threat to harm Jacob here points to it being at least a likely possibility. So let's keep on reading a little further. Verses 31 to 35. Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force." Reasonable, I think. "But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of your relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. I'm reminded of a scene from a sitcom called The Office. There's a character named Pam who goes back to her high school for some business event going on in the gym. And as she's sitting in the gym talking to the camera, she says, "Oh, fond memories, saying I'm on my period so I don't have to play volleyball, saying I'm on my period so I don't have to play basketball." Pam, like Rachel, knows, tell a guy anything related to a period, he's going to probably try and veer away as quickly as possible. And so Rachel takes advantage of that here, and she is not found out. Let's continue reading verses 36 to 42. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine. Let them judge between the two of us. I've been with you 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night. The sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." Now, Jacob does not know, of course, that in a way he is in the wrong here because he does not know Rachel has stolen these idols. But in everything else that he said here, he is right. And we know that claim that he'd said earlier to the daughters about the father Laban changing his wages 10 times. It wasn't just something he was saying to the daughters, because he's saying it right here to Laban's face. "You changed my wages 10 times. He worked for him for 20 years, and still Laban is trying to hunt him down as soon as he goes. But I want us to particularly note there what he said in verse 42. "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac," fear of Isaac means the God of Isaac. This is talking about how we are all to have a fear of the Lord. The same way we should have a healthy, respectful fear of a parent who can punish us for misbehaving. That's why he's using the term fear, that the fear of Isaac had not been with me. You would surely have sent me away empty-handed. So Jacob is recognizing here, and I think this is a moment to stop and realize and acknowledge that he's had some spiritual growth as he's going along. He had that interaction where God appeared to him before he arrives at Laban. Now he is recognizing everything he has here is because God has given it to him. As much work as we might want to put in, rather how blessed we are, all the blessings, all the good things we have in our lives, the Bible says, is from the Lord. But last night he said to Laban, God rebuked you. Let's continue reading on here. Laban answered Jacob, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap and ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it is called Gilead." It was also called Mizpah, because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me." Laban also said to Jacob, "Here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to eat a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, then left and returned home. So just so you know, Jagar, Sahadutha, and Gilead both just mean witness heap. But look at the wording that Laban starts with in verse 43. The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. He has learned very little. The only thing he seems to have learned is he's not going to directly cross the Lord who spoke to him and appeared to him in that dream. He's not going to attack Jacob. But he still thinks all that's his, even though they had made this deal and Laban had tried to double-cross Jacob repeatedly. And so they make this agreement. And I wanted to show you something. First, whoops, should have shown you that before. Where have we got it here? This is the journey of where Jacob would have started and went all the way back up here, all the way back down here. This is roughly where the interaction with Laban would have happened. And this, by the way, coming up is where the interaction where Jacob re-meets with Esau. That is a fun story. That is, where is the one I wanted to show you, though? This is the other one I wanted to show you. This is called a Mizpah pendant. And as it says here, a wonderful Bible verse, the Lord watched between me and thee while we are absent from one another. And it's from this passage we just read. I wanted to show you this because this is a good reminder that when we take Bible verses, we need to take them in context. Because in context, as beautiful as that sounds, that's not a pleasant agreement these two are making. Laban is basically saying, let's make an agreement not to kill each other and attack each other. It's not the heart, touching thing that this pendant represents. Which also reminded me, by the way, another thing to keep passages in context. I saw this years ago. It's a verse of the day calendar. If thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. That was Satan trying to tempt Jesus in the wilderness. So always take passages in context. Little side note lesson from that. So the heap and the pillar, they were supposed to be boundary markers so that neither of them should cross towards the other in any kind of hostility. So let me just end by highlighting a couple of things that I think we can learn from the passage. First of all, trust in God. Jacob describes here a very, very difficult 20 years of hard labor he did. After the wonderful prophecy about what God would do, I doubt as he was growing up, Jacob realized he was going to live 20 years of this kind of hardship. But he trusted in God. God took care of him. God's taking care of us. Even at times we can't see how, God is taking care of us. That's one thing. Another one is have patience. It is good to wait on the Lord. Jacob waited 20 years before he got to go back home. That is a very long time, especially back then. 20 years not knowing what's going on with his family, 20 years of hard labor. Patience, trust in God, wait on the Lord. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the blessings that you give us. I thank you for all these stories that you have filled the Bible with that we can learn from. Reminders of how to live for you, how to have more peace in this life. Lord, reminders of how we can let go of stress and anxiety if we have a heart like so many of these great people of faith in the Scriptures, that even in difficult times, Lord, that we can take heart in you, that we can trust in you. Lord, I pray that you would give us those blessings. And Lord, when you're building up our patience and our faith, and it sometimes takes difficulty and struggle to get those lessons through to us, Lord, I pray that you would just help us not to react poorly, Lord, but instead that we would just lean harder on you. Lord, I pray for your blessing through the rest of this week, but Lord, in particular right now, I again pray for the funeral service this afternoon for Ann Clausen. I pray again for all of her friends, her family, loved ones. Lord, that they would feel your presence in a very powerful way today. In Jesus' holy name, amen.